Everyone knows the name Gwyn, but nobody remembers his son. This is the story of a god who was erased from history, a warrior so powerful that even the other gods feared what he could become. And yet today, if you search the ancient records of Anor Londo, you will find nothing. You will find no name and no statues. There is no proof he ever existed at all, but he did exist, and his story begins at the dawn of everything. When the first flame sparked into existence, it brought light to a world of grey. The Age of Fire began, and with it came the rise of Gwyn, Lord of Sunlight. He claimed the most powerful of the Lord's souls and built a kingdom for the gods in a golden city called Anor Londo. Towering spires reached toward the sun. Grand halls echoed with the footsteps of divine beings. And at the center of it all sat Gwyn on his throne, watching over an age of light and prosperity. Gwyn had several children who would shape the fate of the world. His daughter Guinevere was known for her beauty and grace. His younger son Gwyndolin was born with an affinity for the moon, but his firstborn son was different from both of them. This child inherited something special from his father. He carried the power of sunlight itself, and that power came out as lightning. From the moment he could walk, this firstborn showed a gift for combat that nobody else could match. While other gods concerned themselves with politics or magic, or the finer things of divine life, he cared about one thing and one thing only. He cared about strength and the art of war, the clash of weapons and the thrill of victory. Gwyn saw this fire in his eldest son and recognized it. Here was an heir who could carry on his legacy. Here was a warrior who would one day lead the gods when Gwyn himself was gone. The Lord of Sunlight placed enormous responsibility on his firstborn, expecting him to become the future ruler of Anor Londo and the protector of the Age of Fire. The humans of the world below looked up at this god and gave him a title. They called him the God of War. To them, he represented everything honorable about battle. He was the symbol of martial prowess and courage under fire. Warriors prayed to him before going into conflict. Champions dedicated their victories to his name, and he rewarded those who proved themselves worthy. The firstborn wielded miracles that harnessed the very essence of sunlight. His sunlight blade could wrap any weapon in crackling lightning. His great lightning spear could strike down enemies from across the battlefield with a bolt of pure energy. He wore a ring that made his miracles even stronger, a ring that would later become known as the Ring of the Sun's Firstborn. Every aspect of his power traced back to the same source. His father's light transformed into the fury of storms. He grew up in Anor Londo alongside his siblings. They lived in the grandest palace the world had ever seen. Statues of their family lined the great halls. Paintings celebrated their deeds. The gods walked among humans, but stood apart from them, existing on a higher level entirely. But where Guinevere seemed content with her divine life, and Gwyndolin lurked in the shadows of the moon, the firstborn always looked outward. He wanted to test himself. He wanted to prove that his strength meant something. And soon enough, he would get his chance. Because a war was coming. The greatest war the world would ever know. The gods were about to face an enemy that had existed since before time had meaning. Ancient beings with scales of stone and bodies that could not be harmed by any ordinary weapon. They were the everlasting dragons, and Gwyn's firstborn son was about to become the most feared dragon slayer of them all. Before the Age of Fire, there was nothing but grey. Archtrees stretched endlessly into fog. Everlasting dragons ruled over a world where time itself stood still. These creatures were not like any beast that would come after them. Their scales were made of stone. Their bodies could not be harmed by any weapon forged by mortal hands. They simply existed, unchanging and unchallengeable, for longer than anyone could measure. Then the first flame appeared and brought disparity to the world. It brought light and dark together. It brought life and death into being. It brought heat and cold where none had existed before. The lords rose from the dark with souls of incredible power, and they looked upon the dragons with new eyes. These ancient creatures stood in the way of everything the gods wanted to build. If the Age of Fire was going to flourish, the dragons had to fall. Gwyn gathered his forces for a war that would decide the fate of everything. He brought together his mightiest knights and his most trusted allies. The Witch of Izalith unleashed firestorms that scorched dragon flesh. Seath the Scaleless, a dragon who betrayed his own kind, revealed the secret weakness of his brethren. And standing right beside Gwyn on the front lines was his firstborn son, ready to prove himself in the greatest conflict the world had ever seen. The firstborn did not hang back while others fought. He charged into battle alongside his father, hurling lightning bolts with a fury that shook the very earth. These were not ordinary attacks. The sunlight lightning he commanded had a special property that nothing else possessed. It could peel away the stone scales that protected the dragons, leaving them vulnerable for the first time in their eternal existence. Try to picture what that battlefield looked like. Massive dragons with wings that blotted out the sky, breathing fire hot enough to melt stone. And there among them, a single god leaping from rock to rock, throwing bolt after bolt of crackling energy. Each strike peeled back another layer of protection. Each hit brought another immortal creature one step closer to defeat. The firstborn was not just participating in this war, he was winning it. His weapon of choice was a sword spear unlike anything else in the arsenal of the gods. This was a blade designed for the age of gods themselves, imbued with lightning that crackled along its edge. In his hands, it became an extension of his will. He could thrust it forward to pierce dragonhide, or sweep it wide to send arcs of electricity through multiple enemies at once. The sword spear became legendary on the battlefield, and so did the warrior who wielded it. The firstborn fought so many dragons and claimed so many victories that the legends could barely keep track of them all. One story in particular stood out. It was said that he collected the scales of the dragons he defeated and forged them into his own personal armor. The very defenses that once protected these immortal creatures now protected the god who brought them down. He wore his victories on his body as a constant reminder of what he had accomplished. But the firstborn did not fight alone. He had a knight by his side who would become just as famous in his own right. His name was Ornstein, and he served as the firstborn's first knight during the entire war against the dragons. Ornstein was there for every major battle. He learned how to fight by watching the god of war himself in action. The techniques that the firstborn used became the techniques that Ornstein practiced day after day. The lightning that the firstborn commanded became the lightning that Ornstein learned to wield. Their fighting styles were so similar that you could watch them in combat and see the same movements, the same patterns, the same devastating strikes. This was not just a professional relationship between a lord and his servant. These two were brothers in arms. They trusted each other with their lives on battlefields where a single mistake meant destruction. Ornstein earned everything he had by fighting beside the firstborn through the worst the dragons could throw at them. And when the war finally ended, Ornstein walked away with a title that would follow him forever. He became known as Dragon Slayer Ornstein, one of the 4 Knights of Gwyn. That title was not given to him for nothing. He earned it in the fire and lightning of a war that reshaped the entire world. He earned it by standing beside a god who respected strength above all else. And for the rest of his existence, Ornstein would carry the legacy of those battles with him. The dragons fell one by one, until none remained. The Age of Fire began in earnest. Gwyn built his kingdom in Anor Londo, while the world below flourished under the light of the sun, and the firstborn stood at the peak of his glory, celebrated as one of the greatest warriors the gods had ever produced. He had proven himself on the grandest stage possible. He had helped his father reshape reality itself. And now, with the dragons defeated and the Age of Fire secure, he turned his attention to something new. He wanted to share his strength with those who followed him. The firstborn was about to create something that would outlast empires and survive the fall of gods themselves. The war was over. The dragons were gone. But the firstborn was not content to simply rest on his victories and wait for the next battle to find him. He had spent his entire existence proving that strength and honor in combat were the highest virtues a warrior could possess. Now he wanted to pass those values on to others. So he created something new. He founded a covenant called the Warriors of Sunlight. This was not just another group of soldiers following orders from a commander. The Warriors of Sunlight were devoted specifically to the Heir of Sunlight himself. They swore their loyalty to the god of war and promised to uphold everything he stood for. And in return, he watched over them with a closeness that no other god showed to their followers. The core belief of the covenant was simple. Warriors should help each other. When one of the faithful faced a challenge too great to overcome alone, they could call upon their brothers and sisters in arms to join them. This idea of jolly cooperation became the foundation of everything the Warriors of Sunlight believed in. Together, they could face any enemy. Together, they could overcome any obstacle. To mark their victories and their dedication, the Warriors of Sunlight earned special tokens called Sunlight Medals. These were not ordinary decorations. Each medal was engraved with the symbol of their patron god. That symbol was a holy sun, representing the light and power that the firstborn had inherited from his father Gwyn. Carrying one of these medals meant that a warrior had proven themselves in battle. It meant they had the favor of the god of war himself. The faithful cherished these medals above almost any other possession. Each one represented a battle won, an ally helped, a moment where the teachings of the covenant proved true. Warriors collected them as trophies and offered them at sacred altars to show their continued devotion. And the firstborn noticed. He paid attention to every warrior who served under his banner. When champions offered their sunlight medals and demonstrated that they had truly earned the right to call themselves his followers, he rewarded them with something priceless. He taught them how to wield the same lightning miracles that he had used to bring down dragons. The first of these teachings was the Great Lightning Spear. This miracle allowed a mortal warrior to hurl a bolt of sunlight energy at their enemies, striking them down from a distance with the same power that once peeled scales from immortal dragons. It was a gift from a god to his faithful, and it transformed ordinary warriors into something far more dangerous. But for those who proved themselves even further, there was an even greater reward. The Sunlight Spear was the ultimate expression of the firstborn's power shared with mortals. This miracle carried enough force to devastate any foe, and learning it meant that a warrior had reached the highest levels of the covenant. They had become true champions of the sun. In this way, the firstborn spread the power of sunlight throughout the mortal world. What had once been the exclusive domain of gods and their children now belonged to anyone willing to fight with honor and stand beside their allies in battle. The lightning that shook the foundations of the Dragon War now crackled in the hands of human warriors who had never set foot in Anor Londo. The center of this covenant was a sacred place called the Sunlight Altar. This small shrine stood in what would later become known as the Undead Parish, a fortress that overlooked the lands below Anor Londo. At the heart of the altar stood a statue depicting a deity holding a sword. This statue honored the firstborn himself, showing him as the warrior god that mortals revered. Warriors would come to this altar to swear their allegiance. They would pray before the statue and join the covenant, becoming official members of the Warriors of Sunlight. The altar itself emanated holy sunlight, bathing all who approached in the warm glow of the firstborn's blessing. It was a sacred space where the connection between mortal and God felt real and immediate. One of the most devoted warriors to ever kneel at this altar was a knight named Solaire of Astora. He became the embodiment of everything the Warriors of Sunlight stood for. His dedication to jolly cooperation and his search for his own son made him legendary among those who followed the same path. He wore the symbol of the covenant proudly and spread its teachings wherever he traveled. The altar and its statue stood as a testament to the firstborn's influence on the mortal world. Long after the Age of Fire began to fade, long after the gods retreated from their golden city, that altar remained. Warriors still came to pray there. The covenant still accepted new members. The sun still shone upon those who proved themselves worthy. But if you were to visit that altar today, you would notice something strange. The statue at its center is shattered. The image of the deity with the sword has been deliberately destroyed. Someone wanted to make sure that no one could look upon the firstborn's face ever again. This destruction was not an accident. It was not the work of time or neglect. The statue was broken on purpose, and the reason for that destruction ties directly into the darkest chapter of the firstborn's story. Something happened that turned the god of war from a celebrated hero into something that had to be erased from history entirely. The firstborn was about to make a choice that would cost him everything. The Age of Fire was fading. The first flame that had sparked an entire era of light and prosperity was beginning to weaken. And Gwyn, Lord of Sunlight, knew what had to be done. He gathered his mightiest knights and descended into the kiln of the first flame. There, in the heart of all creation, Gwyn sacrificed himself to link the flame and keep the Age of Fire burning for a little while longer. He gave up his own soul to feed the dying embers. The Lord of Sunlight was gone, and with his departure, everything changed in Anor Londo. The throne now belonged to the firstborn. By every right of succession and every tradition of the gods, the eldest son of Gwyn was the new ruler. He inherited more than just a kingdom. He inherited his father's very titles. The firstborn became the new god of sunlight, carrying the same mantle that Gwyn had worn since the dawn of the Age of Fire. He became the king of the gods, the supreme authority in Anor Londo. To mark this ascension, the firstborn donned a golden crown that resembled the one his father had worn. This was a deliberate choice. It showed everyone that the legacy of Gwyn would continue through his son. The war god, who had proven himself against dragons and built a covenant of loyal warriors, was now responsible for the entire pantheon. At this moment in history, no living being could match his power in combat. He stood at the absolute peak of martial strength among the gods. Everyone expected him to lead Anor Londo into a new chapter of the Age of Fire. Everyone expected him to maintain everything his father had built and ensure that the flame would continue to burn. The firstborn took this responsibility seriously. He continued the plans that Gwyn had set in motion before linking the flame. Anor Londo's influence reached far beyond its golden walls, extending down into the lands below, where humanity struggled against the curse of undeath. The Undead Burg and the Undead Parish were not random settlements that sprang up by accident. These were places designed with a purpose. They served as testing grounds for undead warriors, challenges that would separate the weak from the strong. Only those who proved themselves worthy could advance toward the city of the gods. Some interpretations of the lore suggest that the firstborn oversaw the creation of Sen's fortress during his reign. This massive structure was a gauntlet of deadly traps and powerful guardians that stood between the lower lands and Anor Londo. Anyone who wanted to reach the gods had to survive its corridors first. It was the ultimate test of skill and determination. All of this connected to a larger design. There was a prophecy about a chosen undead who would one day succeed Gwyn and link the flame themselves. The entire structure of the world below Anor Londo was meant to guide this prophesied hero toward their destiny. The tests would forge them, the challenges would prepare them, and eventually they would reach the kiln and continue the cycle that kept the Age of Fire alive. Though the lore never states it directly, the firstborn appears to have played a central role in maintaining these designs during his time as king. He was carrying forward everything his father had planned. He was keeping the Age of Fire intact, but the world was not cooperating. The firstborn's reign was marked by one crisis after another. Threats emerged from every direction, and the gods found themselves struggling to maintain control over a world that seemed determined to fall into chaos. New Londo was one of the first disasters. This city had once been a thriving center of humanity, built below the parish in the lands nearest to Anor Londo. But something went terribly wrong. The 4 kings who ruled New Londo succumbed to the dark. They fell under the influence of a serpent named Karth, who whispered of a different path, an age of dark instead of an age of fire. The corruption spread so quickly and so completely that the gods had no choice but to take drastic action. They flooded the entire city, sealing the darkness and its servants beneath the waters. New Londo became a tomb, its streets forever drowned to prevent the corruption from spreading further. Then came Ulasil. This land of sorcerers had existed peacefully for generations, practicing their golden magic and living in harmony with the natural world. But they made a terrible mistake. They disturbed the grave of an ancient being called Manus, the father of the Abyss. The Abyss awoke and consumed Ulasil entirely. The peaceful sorcerers were twisted into horrible creatures. The land itself became corrupted by a darkness that threatened to spread beyond its borders. This catastrophe happened under the watch of the gods, and there was nothing they could do to prevent it. Even within Anor Londo itself, danger lurked. A group of occult rebels rose up against the Pantheon. These were not external enemies, but traitors from within the gods' own domain. They stole divine weapons, artifacts that had been crafted specifically for use by the gods, and they plotted to use those weapons to destroy the very deities they had once served. To make matters worse, one of Gwyn's oldest allies descended into madness. Seath the Scaleless, the dragon who had betrayed his own kind during the Great War, had been granted a place of honor in the crystal caves beneath Anor Londo. But Seath's obsession with immortality drove him insane. He began kidnapping maidens from the lands around his domain, subjecting them to horrific experiments in his endless quest to overcome his lack of the immortal scales that other dragons possessed. The lore does not tell us exactly how the firstborn responded to each of these crises. We do not know which battles he fought or which decisions he made. But we do know that all of this chaos weakened the gods' hold on the world. The Age of Fire was slipping away no matter how hard they tried to maintain it. And somewhere in the middle of all this turmoil, the firstborn began to change. Perhaps the constant struggles made him question what he was fighting for. Perhaps watching crisis after crisis unfold made him reconsider everything he believed about the gods and their enemies. Whatever the reason, the god of war was about to do something that no one could have predicted. He was about to side with the very creatures his entire legacy had been built on destroying. Nobody knows exactly when it happened, Nobody knows the precise moment when the god of war looked at everything he had built and everything he had fought for and decided to throw it all away. But at some point during his reign, the firstborn made a choice that would echo through eternity. He allied himself with the dragons. This was the warrior who had stood beside his father in the great war against the everlasting dragons. This was the god who had hurled lightning bolts that peeled away their stone scales. This was the champion who wore armor forged from the very scales of the dragons he had defeated. His entire legend was built on being a dragon slayer. And now he was joining them. The lore describes this as the ultimate heresy. In the eyes of Anor Londo, there was no greater betrayal imaginable. The entire rule of the gods had been built on one foundational truth. They had defeated the dragons and claimed the world for themselves. Everything that followed, every golden spire and every divine blessing, existed because the gods had triumphed over those ancient creatures. For the firstborn to side with the dragons was to reject everything the gods stood for. It was to spit on the victory that had made the Age of Fire possible. It was to turn his back on his father's legacy and the very civilization that had raised him. According to his soul's description, found much later in Dark Souls 3, the Nameless King sacrificed everything to ally himself with the ancient dragons. That word is important because it tells us everything about his mindset. He did not stumble into this decision by accident. He did not get tricked or manipulated into joining the enemy. He made a conscious choice to give up his status, his home, and his family ties. He threw away the throne of Anor Londo and the title of God of Sunlight. He abandoned the covenant of warriors who worshipped him and the kingdom that looked to him for leadership. All of this he surrendered willingly, and he did it out of reverence for the dragons. But why would he do something like this? What could possibly drive the greatest dragon slayer among the gods to join forces with the creatures he had spent his early existence destroying? The exact reasons are lost to history. The gods made sure of that when they erased his name from every record, but hints survive in the fragments of lore that remain. The firstborn was a warrior above all else. He had respect only for arms and nothing else. Combat was not just something he did, it was who he was at his core. He valued strength and martial prowess more than politics or diplomacy, or any of the other concerns that occupied the minds of his fellow gods. And when he thought about the beings he had fought in his existence, one group stood above all others. The everlasting dragons had been the ultimate opponents. They were creatures of such power that it took the combined might of the lords and their armies to bring them down. Their scales could not be pierced by ordinary weapons. Their bodies did not age or weaken over time. They had existed since before time itself had meaning. Perhaps the firstborn came to admire what he had once sought to destroy. Perhaps he looked at the dragons and saw warriors who embodied everything he valued. They were strong beyond measure. They were ancient beyond comprehension. They represented a kind of martial purity that the other gods could never match. The gods of Anor Londo spent their time on politics and scheming. They built temples and accumulated followers. They worried about maintaining power and preserving their positions. But the dragons simply existed as they always had, timeless and mighty, needing nothing and fearing nothing. For a god who cared only about strength, the dragons may have seemed like the only beings worthy of true respect. There is also the possibility that the firstborn sought a different kind of fellowship. The gods were his family by blood, but did they truly understand him? Did Guinevere share his passion for battle? Did Gwyndolin appreciate the thrill of combat? The other gods had their own concerns and their own paths. Perhaps the firstborn felt alone among his own kind, respected but never truly connected. Among the dragons, he might have found the warrior's camaraderie that he could never have with the other gods. These were creatures who understood combat on a level that no deity ever could. They had faced the lords in open war and fought with everything they had. Even in defeat, they had earned the respect of anyone who valued strength. Whatever the true reason, the official law leaves no room for interpretation about how Anor Londo viewed this decision. It was a grave error, so grave that it could never be forgiven, so grave that it would cost him absolutely everything. To the remaining gods, this was unthinkable treachery. The firstborn had been destined to lead them. He had inherited the throne of their greatest lord. He had worn the crown and carried the titles, and now he had sided with the ancient enemies whose defeat was the foundation of everything they had built. In an instant, he went from beloved heir to condemned traitor. There was no middle ground. There was no path back. The schism between the firstborn and the other gods was complete and total. Gwyndolin, the younger child of Gwyn, now stood as the only remaining divine authority in Anor Londo. Whatever relationship had existed between the siblings was now shattered beyond repair. This betrayal marked one of the greatest ruptures in the entire history of Lordran. The gods had faced external threats before. They had dealt with the corruption of New Londo and the catastrophe of Ulasil. But this was different. This was a betrayal from within their own family. This was the heir apparent choosing enemies over kin, and the gods were about to respond with a punishment so severe that it would erase the firstborn from existence itself. The response from the gods was swift and absolute. There would be no trial. There would be no chance to explain or defend his actions. The firstborn had committed the ultimate heresy, and the punishment would match the severity of his crime. He was dethroned immediately. The crown that he had worn in his father's memory was taken from him. The title of God of Sunlight that he had inherited was stripped away. His deific status, the very essence of what made him a god among gods, was revoked by royal decree. In a single devastating moment, the mightiest warrior in Anor Londo became nothing. But the gods were not satisfied with simply removing him from power. They wanted more than his throne. They wanted him gone from history itself. All records of his identity were purged from every archive in Anor Londo. His name was expunged from every document, every chronicle, every piece of written history that the gods controlled. Scribes went through ancient texts and removed any mention of who he had been. The name that had once been spoken with reverence and fear was erased so completely that no one would ever be able to speak it again. From this point forward, he would have no name at all. He would be known only by what he had lost. Characters who speak of him in the lore can only refer to him indirectly, calling him Lord Gwyn's firstborn, because that is all anyone remembers. His true name became shrouded in mystery so deep that even those who study the history of the gods cannot recover it. The Ring of the Sun's firstborn, an item that would survive through the ages, contains a description that hints at the scope of this erasure. It says that his foolishness led to the loss of the annals of history regarding the gods. This suggests that the records and chronicles of an entire era were somehow lost or destroyed as a result of his actions. Some interpret this to mean that the firstborn himself was responsible for an event that wiped out important histories. Others believe it refers to the gods deliberately removing written records about him, essentially erasing the annals that mentioned his existence. Either way, the result was the same. Not only was his own name wiped from memory, but an entire era's worth of written history was lost along with it. The physical evidence of his existence received the same treatment as the written records. The gods could not allow any image of the traitor to remain in their sacred city. In the grand cathedral of Anor Londo, there stands an array of statues honoring Gwyn's family. The Lord of Sunlight himself has his statue, immortalized in stone for all to see. His daughter Guinevere has her own statue as well, depicting her divine beauty. But there is a third pedestal in that cathedral, and it stands conspicuously empty. That empty space once held a statue of the firstborn. When he was condemned, the gods ordered it removed. They did not want anyone who visited the cathedral to see his face, or remember that he had ever been part of their family. The empty pedestal became a silent reminder of what happens to those who betray the gods, though most who see it have no idea whose image once stood there. The destruction went far beyond Anor Londo. Throughout the lands of Lordran, wherever statues of the god of war had been erected, the gods sent orders for their destruction. The sunlight altars, where warriors had once gathered to join his covenant, all featured statues depicting a deity with a sword bearing a sun emblem. Some of these showed what appeared to be the firstborn as a child, held in his mother's arms. Every single one of these statues was smashed. The heads were broken off. The features were deliberately destroyed so that no one could recognize whose face they depicted. This pattern of destruction extended across generations and kingdoms. Even in Drangleic, a land that would rise long after Lordran fell, the same broken statues appeared at altars dedicated to the sun. Even in Lothric, ages later still, the pattern continued. The thoroughness of this destruction reinforced how completely the gods wanted to condemn his memory. This was not careless vandalism. This was a systematic campaign to ensure that no trace of the firstborn's image would survive anywhere in the world. The gods wanted him forgotten, and they were willing to destroy priceless works of art to make it happen. But before he left Anor Londo forever, the exiled god did something unexpected. He had been stripped of everything: his title, his status, his name, his home. He had been cast out by his own family and condemned as the greatest traitor in the history of the gods. Yet even after all of this, he took the time to pay one final tribute to the father he would never see again. He returned to Gwyn's honorary tomb within Anor Londo. This was a mausoleum built to honor the Lord of Sunlight after he had linked the first flame. The coffin inside was empty because Gwyn's body had been consumed by the fire he sacrificed himself to fuel. But the tomb remained as a place where the gods could remember their greatest lord. The firstborn entered that tomb and left two of his most personal treasures on the empty coffin. The first was the miracle called Sunlight Blade. This was one of his signature powers, a divine blessing that could wrap any weapon in crackling lightning. He had used this miracle countless times in battle. It was a part of who he was as the god of war. The second was the Ring of the Sun's firstborn itself. This ring had amplified his divine miracles, making his lightning even more powerful. It was a symbol of his status as Gwyn's heir, crafted specifically for the one who would inherit the light. Leaving these treasures at his father's empty grave was a final silent farewell. Despite everything that had happened, despite his choice to side with the dragons and his rejection of everything the gods stood for, he still loved the father who had trusted him with so much. Gwyn was long gone, having sacrificed himself ages ago. There was no one to receive this tribute. The coffin was empty and would remain empty forever, but the gesture still mattered. It showed that the firstborn's betrayal of the gods was not a betrayal of his father's memory. He was leaving behind pieces of himself in the only place where Gwyn's spirit might still linger. It was an act of honor to an empty grave, performed by a son who had lost everything except the love he held for the father he would never see again. With this final farewell complete, the Nameless King departed from Anor Londo and vanished into the unknown. The gods closed ranks behind him. His siblings would never speak of him openly again. The records of his existence would crumble to dust over the centuries, and the world would move on as if the greatest warrior among the gods had never existed at all. But he was still out there, somewhere beyond the reach of the gods who had condemned him, and he had found a new home among the very creatures who had inspired his fall from grace. Ages passed, and kingdoms rose and fell. The world of Lordran changed beyond recognition as the cycles of fire and dark repeated themselves over and over again. And through all of it, the Nameless King remained exactly that. He was nameless and forgotten, a ghost in the margins of history. By the time the events of Dark Souls 1 unfold, almost no one in Lordran remembers that Gwyn ever had a firstborn son. The erasure that the gods enacted so long ago had done its work. Generations upon generations lived and perished without ever hearing the name of the god of war. The greatest warrior among the gods had become nothing more than a whisper, a shadow, a mystery that most people did not even know existed. But the truth has a way of leaving traces. No matter how thoroughly something is erased, fragments always survive for those who know where to look. Players who explored the world of Dark Souls 1 could find scattered hints about the Firstborn if they paid close attention. These were not obvious revelations spelled out in dialogue or cutscenes. They were subtle clues hidden in item descriptions and environmental details, pieces of a puzzle that most people would never think to assemble. The Sunlight Medal, which warriors of sunlight earned for helping each other in battle, contained one of the clearest references. Its description mentioned that the war god's deity status had been rescinded due to foolishness. It also noted that his name had been wiped from all records. This single item description confirmed several key facts about the Firstborn's fate. He had done something foolish in the eyes of the gods. He had lost his divine status as punishment, and his name had been deliberately erased. The Ring of the Sun's Firstborn stated the situation even more explicitly. This ring, which players could find on Gwyn's honorary coffin in Anor Londo, declared that Lord Gwyn's Firstborn had lost his deity status and that everyone had forgotten his name. Here was direct confirmation that Gwyn had a firstborn son and that something terrible had happened to him. But even this item, which spoke so plainly about the Firstborn's existence, could not reveal what his actual name had been. These descriptions told the broad strokes of his story. They spoke of a foolish action and a disgrace that cost him everything. They confirmed the complete loss of his name and identity, but they left the details shrouded in darkness. What exactly had he done? Where had he gone after his exile? Was he still alive somewhere, or had he faded away like so many other relics of the Age of Fire? For players of the first Dark Souls game, these questions had no answers. The Firstborn of Gwyn became one of the great mysteries of the series. Fans debated endlessly about who he might have been and what had happened to him. They searched every corner of Lordran for additional clues, and they developed theories that would persist for years. The physical environment of Anor Londo reinforced the mystery. Players who traversed the golden city of the gods could see the evidence of the Firstborn's erasure with their own eyes. The empty pedestal in the Grand Cathedral stood as a silent testament to someone who had been removed from the family record. The broken statues at the Sunlight Altar showed that whoever had been depicted there had been deliberately destroyed. And in the chamber where the illusion of Guinevere resided, players could find the Sunlight Blade miracle resting on Gwyn's coffin. This powerful lightning miracle, which could enchant weapons with crackling energy, had clearly been placed there by someone who had a deep connection to both Gwyn and the power of sunlight. The environmental storytelling suggested that someone close to the Lord of Sunlight had left this treasure behind as a tribute. All of these clues pointed toward the same conclusion. Gwyn had a firstborn son who had been erased from history. That son had left behind traces that could still be found by those who explored thoroughly. But the full truth of who he was and what had happened to him remained locked away. No NPCs in Dark Souls 1 spoke openly about the Firstborn. His tale had become more legend than fact, a story so old and so suppressed that even the characters who inhabited Lordran had forgotten it. The gods who knew the truth were either gone or unwilling to speak. The humans who worshipped at the sunlight altars had no idea whose covenant they were joining. This mystery led to one of the most persistent fan theories in the entire Dark Souls community. It centered on a character named Solaire of Astora. Solaire was a knight who players could encounter throughout their journey in Dark Souls 1. He was instantly memorable for his cheerful personality and his obsession with the sun. Where other characters in Lordran were grim and cryptic, Solaire greeted players with enthusiasm and talked about his quest to find his own sun. He could join the warriors of Sunlight Covenant and used lightning miracles in combat. His armor bore the sun emblem, and he wielded a weapon called the Sunlight Straightsword. Given all of these solar connections, many fans theorized that Solaire might actually be Gwyn's lost son in disguise. Perhaps the Firstborn had hidden himself among mortals, taking on a new identity while continuing to serve the principles he had always believed in. Perhaps his search for his own son was really a search for his lost divine nature, or a way back to the glory he had sacrificed. It was an appealing theory that fit neatly with the available evidence, but it was never confirmed by any official source. In fact, Solaire's own dialogue and item descriptions portrayed him as exactly what he appeared to be: a mortal knight from Astora with grand aspirations and an unusual fascination with the sun. He was not a god in hiding. He was a human who had dedicated his existence to the light. Later games in the series would firmly dispel this theory by identifying the Nameless King as the true Firstborn of Gwyn. Dark Souls 3 would eventually reveal the exiled god in the flesh, showing players exactly who he was and what had become of him. With that revelation, Solaire's role in the story became clear. He was not Gwyn's son. He was Gwyn's son's most devoted follower. Solaire embodied everything that the Warriors of Sunlight stood for. He helped others in their darkest moments. He brought light and hope to a world drowning in despair. He wore the symbol of the Covenant proudly and spread its teachings wherever he traveled. In many ways, he was the perfect representation of what the Firstborn had tried to create when he founded the Covenant all those ages ago. His Sunlight Straightsword and his armor bearing the sun emblem connected him directly to the legacy of the Nameless King. But he was a follower, not the founder, a disciple, not the deity. The mystery of the Firstborn would have to wait for another game to be solved. In the meantime, the Nameless King remained lost to time. His name stayed forgotten, his story stayed incomplete, and players were left to wonder what had become of the greatest warrior among the gods. But he was still out there, somewhere beyond the edges of the known world, and eventually the truth would come to light. The gods had done everything in their power to erase the Nameless King from existence. They had destroyed his statues and burned his records and forbidden anyone from speaking his name. They wanted him forgotten completely, as if he had never been born at all. But they could not destroy what he had created. The Warriors of Sunlight continued to exist long after the Firstborn was exiled. The Covenant that he had founded survived the fall of its creator, and something even more remarkable happened in the centuries that followed. Despite being cast out from Anor Londo and condemned as a traitor to the gods, the Nameless King never stopped watching over his followers. The lore suggests that the war god continued to listen to the prayers of those who served under his banner. Even in exile, even stripped of his divine status and erased from history, he maintained his connection to the faithful. When warriors offered sunlight medals at the altars dedicated to him, they received blessings in return. New miracles were granted to those who proved themselves worthy. The lightning powers that the Firstborn had shared with mortals during the Age of Fire continued to flow through willing hands. This lingering divine influence showed something important about the Nameless King's character. His betrayal of the gods had not been a betrayal of the principles he believed in. He still valued strength and honor in combat. He still rewarded those who helped their fellow warriors in times of need. The Covenant was more than just an organization he had created. It was an expression of his core beliefs, and he would not abandon it simply because the gods had abandoned him. Ages passed, and the world transformed. Lordran faded into memory as new kingdoms rose from the ashes of the old. Eventually, a land called Drangleic emerged under the rule of King Vendrick. This was a different era entirely, separated from the events of Dark Souls won by countless cycles of fire and dark. The gods of Anor Londo were long gone. The name of Gwyn was barely remembered, and the Nameless King had been forgotten so completely that no one even knew there was something to forget. But the covenant he had created endured through it all. In Drangleic, a group calling themselves the Heirs of the Sun carried on the traditions that the Firstborn had established so long ago. They operated exactly like the Warriors of Sunlight from the previous age. They believed in helping others overcome challenges they could not face alone. They practiced jolly cooperation and earned sunlight medals for their victories. They wore the symbol of the sun and spread the teachings that had been passed down through countless generations. The name had changed from Warriors of Sunlight to Heirs of the Sun, but the spirit remained identical. This was direct continuity from the original covenant, proof that the Firstborn's creation had survived the collapse of entire civilizations. Whatever else might fade away, the ideals of Sunlight Warriors persisted. In the Harvest Valley region of Drangleic, players could find an altar that looked almost exactly like the Sunlight altar from Lordran. This replica shrine featured the same basic design and served the same purpose. Warriors could come here to join the Covenant and swear their allegiance to the sun. And just like in Lordran, this altar featured a destroyed statue of a warrior. The pattern of erasure had continued across the ages. Someone, somewhere, had made sure that the Firstborn's image would never be seen, even in this distant land. This replica altar implied that worship of the sun god had persisted in some form until Drangleic's fall. Believers had carried the faith from Lordran to new lands, establishing shrines and passing down traditions, even when they no longer remembered whose power they were invoking. The characters of Dark Souls, too, no longer remembered the Firstborn's name. The war god's tales were no longer taught by clerics or scholars. His story had faded so completely that most people in Drangleic had never heard of him at all. But fragments of his legacy survived in unexpected places. The Sunlight Palmer shield depicted an old warrior who resembled Solaire, the devoted knight from Lordran who had embodied the warrior of sunlight ideals. This shield showed that the legends of sunlight warriors had been passed down through the ages, even if the original source of those legends had been forgotten. People remembered the followers, but not the god they followed. The miracles that the Firstborn had taught to his faithful still existed in Drangleic. Lightning Spear was passed down by clerics in various lands, used by warriors who had no idea whose power they were wielding. The techniques survived, even when the teacher's name did not. Most remarkably, the Sunlight Spear miracle could still be obtained by the most devoted members of the Heirs of the Sun. Its description called it a gift of the god of sunlight's ancient blessing, proving that the Firstborn's power continued to reach the faithful across the ages. There was one more intriguing connection in Dark Souls 2 that deserves attention, though it remains unconfirmed by official sources. In the distant land of Ferosa, far from Drangleic, the people worshipped a war god named Faram. The elite Lion Knights of Ferosa wore armor blessed by this deity, and their reputation for martial prowess spread throughout the known world. Ferosa was a land of fierce warriors who valued strength and combat above all else. Exactly the kind of culture that the Firstborn would have favored. It is notable that Faram is essentially a god of war in a game where the original god of war's name was lost. Fans have speculated that Faram could be another name by which Gwyn's Firstborn was known in different lands. Perhaps the exiled god had travelled far from Anor Londo and found a new people to inspire. Perhaps the warriors of Erasure had encountered him or heard tales of him and given him a name since his original one had been erased. The Faram armor's imagery adds weight to this theory. It includes a lion motif and depicts a warrior seemingly confronting a dragon, which could symbolize the Firstborn's legendary prowess as a dragon slayer. The thematic connections are striking enough that many players believe Faram and the Nameless King are the same being. However, the games never explicitly confirm this link. Erasure's patron war god might be the Nameless King under an alias, or Faram might be a completely separate deity who simply shares similar characteristics. The lore leaves this question open, and we may never receive a definitive answer. What we do know for certain is that the Firstborn's influence spread far beyond what the gods of Anor Londo ever intended. They had tried to erase him from existence, but his covenant survived. His miracles survived. His ideals survived. And in lands across the world, warriors continued to fight under the banner of the sun without ever knowing whose legacy they carried. The Nameless King had been stripped of his name, his throne, and his place in history, but he could not be stripped of what he had given to the world. The light he had shared with mortals continued to shine long after the gods who condemned him had faded into darkness. And somewhere, hidden away from the eyes of the world, the exiled god waited. His story was not yet complete. Drangleic rose from the ashes of kingdoms nobody remembered. King Vendrick built his realm on ancient foundations, and his people walked through ruins they could not explain. Somewhere in those layers of forgotten history, the legacy of the Nameless King still flickered. The heirs of the sun gathered at a broken altar in Harvest Valley. They wore the symbol of the sun on their armor. They helped each other through impossible battles and collected sunlight medals as proof of their victories. Everything about them matched the warriors of sunlight from Lordran down to the last detail. But when you read the description on their sun seal ring, something becomes clear. The teachings of the sun were already long lost by the time Drangleic existed. The heirs followed rituals passed down through countless generations, but nobody knew where those rituals came from anymore. They prayed at an altar and had no idea whose altar it was. Different kingdoms across the world had preserved pieces of this forgotten god's power without realizing it. Heir was a country that existed only as ruins by the time of Dark Souls 2. Its towers rose from the waters that had swallowed everything else. But before the floods came, Heir's people had practiced the sunlight miracles. The great lightning spear could be found in the undead crypt because someone from Heir had carried it there. The miracle survived the ages, but the memory of who created it did not. Lindelt was a religious land where clerics still hurled lightning at their enemies. They treated these miracles as sacred gifts from the divine. But here is what the lore tells us directly. The clergy of Lindelt used the Nameless King's miracles of lightning, although the names of the clan of gods and the sun god had been lost. They channeled his power every single day and had no idea whose power it was. So the techniques traveled from teacher to student across the ages. But with each generation, the story behind them faded a little more. By Drangleic's time, the miracles existed in a complete vacuum with no history and no context. Just lightning in the hands of clerics who thought they were serving gods whose names they knew. Here is the strangest part of all this. One name from the old days actually survived into Drangleic, and it belonged to Solaire of Astora. The mortal knight who had followed the Firstborn's path became more famous than the god who created that path. The heirs of the sun could obtain items called the Sun Sword and the Sunlight Palmer. These were references to Solaire's equipment from his journey through Lordran ages earlier. The lore mentioned tales of a knight of sunlight who helped many during a dark time. Everybody knew this was Solaire. His story had traveled across the ages when everything else got lost. The heirs kept his artifacts. They honored them as relics of their covenant's greatest champion. New warriors heard stories about this knight who had embodied everything the sun stood for. They wanted to be like him. They trained to match his skill and his spirit, so the follower became the legend while the god became nothing. Solaire's name echoed through Drangleic, while the Nameless King remained exactly what the gods of Anor Londo had made him. He was nameless and forgotten. The devoted knight who had searched for his own son was remembered across the ages. The deity who had given him a son to search for was erased so completely that nobody even knew there was something to remember. All of this pointed to one truth. The Nameless King's culture refused to disappear. Feros's warriors prayed to Faram. Hyde and Lindelt preserved his lightning miracles. The heirs of the sun continued the practices he had established at the dawn of the Age of Fire. Different lands gave his legacy different names. Different clerics claimed his power for different faiths. But the core of what he had built kept surviving no matter what the gods did to stop it. This pattern would continue into the next age. Another kingdom would rise from the ruins of those that came before. Another sunlight altar would appear with another broken statue. Another generation of warriors would fight under the banner of the sun without knowing whose banner it really was. But this time, something would be different. In the land of Lothric, the mysteries that had lingered since Dark Souls 1 were about to get answers, because the Nameless King was still out there. He had been waiting through all of these ages, hidden away in a place that no ordinary traveler could ever reach, and players were about to find him. The Nameless King vanished from recorded history. Centuries passed while kingdoms crumbled and new ones took their place. The cycles of fire and dark repeated themselves over and over, and through all of it, nobody knew where the exiled god had gone. Then Dark Souls 3 happened, and players finally got their answer. Archdragon Peak exists outside of normal reality. You cannot walk there. You cannot sail there. The only way to reach this place is through a special meditation ritual called the Path of the Dragon. Those who master this technique and perform it before an ancient dragon statue are transported to a sanctuary that floats among the clouds, far removed from any human kingdom. This is where the Nameless King made his home. The peak itself feels like a world built for him. Storm clouds swirl constantly overhead. Lightning crackles through the air at all hours. The weather never calms, never settles into peace. For a god who wielded the power of storms and lightning, this was the perfect domain. He had found a place where his nature matched the environment completely. Archdragon Peak serves as a gathering place for the descendants of the ancient dragons. These are not the everlasting dragons that Gwyn and his allies fought at the dawn of the Age of Fire. Those creatures are long gone, but their bloodline continued through lesser descendants, and those descendants found their way to this sanctuary over the ages. The Nameless King lived among them, finally surrounded by the beings he had chosen over his own family. By the time players encounter him in Dark Souls 3, the Nameless King has formed a bond with a mighty dragon called the King of the Storm. This storm drake carries the power of storms and lightning within its body, making it a perfect partner for the former god of war. The two of them fight as one, with the Nameless King riding atop his companion and striking down enemies with devastating lightning attacks. This partnership goes deeper than a warrior riding a mount into battle. The lore suggests that the Nameless King treated this dragon as a true comrade in arms. They fought together through countless battles across the centuries. They trusted each other with their lives. The bond between them echoes something ancient, a custom from the war against the dragons, when gods like the Nameless King fought alongside the very creatures they were trying to destroy. The item descriptions in Dark Souls 3 paint a picture of what the Nameless King did during his exile. He did not retire. He did not fade into obscurity. He continued living as a warrior, which was the only life he had ever known. Battle after battle, century after century, he honed his skills alongside his Storm Drake. The god who had once been the greatest dragon slayer among the Pantheon now spent his existence defending dragonkind from whoever threatened them. He had sacrificed everything for this alliance. He gave up his throne and his family. He lost his name and his place in history, and he never wavered from that commitment. For ages beyond counting, the Nameless King dedicated himself completely to the dragons he had chosen. Archdragon Peak attracted more than just dragons. Bizarre serpent men roam the ancient structures, creatures twisted by their devotion to dragon worship. Cultists who revere the power of dragons make pilgrimages to this place. The peak became a center of worship for anyone who saw dragons as something more than monsters to be slain. And at the center of it all sat the Nameless King. He became a sort of god king for the dragon worshippers of Archdragon Peak. The title fits him perfectly. He was already a god, even if the Pantheon had stripped away his official status. He was already a king, even if his throne had been taken from him. Here among the dragons and their followers, he reclaimed both roles on his own terms. Something interesting appears throughout Archdragon Peak that connects this new life to the one he left behind. Metal plates scattered around the architecture bear a familiar symbol. The Warrior of Sunlight emblem, the same sun icon that his covenant had used since the Age of Fire, shows up in this dragon sanctuary. This detail suggests that the Nameless King's followers in Archdragon Peak knew exactly who he was. They honored both aspects of his identity. He was the ally of dragons who had given up everything to stand with them. But he was also the heir of sunlight, the god of war, the founder of a warrior covenant that had survived across the ages. The two halves of his story merged here into something new. The Nameless King built a legacy in exile that combined his past with his present. The power of sunlight and storms, the skills of a dragon slayer turned dragon ally, the devotion of warriors who helped each other in battle. All of it came together at Archdragon Peak, where a forgotten god ruled over a hidden kingdom of lightning and scales. He had been waiting here through all the ages that passed since his banishment, waiting while his name was erased and his statues were destroyed, waiting while his covenant survived without knowing whose covenant it was, waiting for someone strong enough to find this place and challenge the mightiest warrior the world had ever produced. That challenger was about to arrive. Finding this place requires more than just wandering in the right direction. You have to earn it. The journey starts in the gardens of Lothric Castle, where a mad king named Osiros guards a forgotten path. This ruler became obsessed with dragons and transformed himself into something barely recognizable as human. Defeating him grants access to the untended graves, and somewhere in those dark depths lies a gesture called the Path of the Dragon. This gesture is a meditative pose that connects the user to something ancient. But knowing the pose is only half the puzzle. You also need to find the right place to use it. Deep within Erasure dungeon, past cells filled with hollowed prisoners and jailers who drain your very will to live, there stands an old dragon statue. Most players walk right past it without a second thought. But if you perform the Path of the Dragon gesture in front of this statue, something remarkable happens. Your body goes still. The world around you fades. And when you open your eyes again, you are somewhere else entirely. You have arrived at Archdragon Peak. The hidden nature of this journey explains why the Nameless King remained a legend. Ordinary people of Lothric could never stumble upon this place by accident. There was no road to follow, no map to consult, no guide who could lead you there. You had to defeat a dragon-obsessed king, find a secret gesture, locate an obscure statue in a dungeon, and perform the exact right action in front of it. Only then would the path reveal itself. This is a mythical place in the truest sense of the word. It exists outside the normal rules of geography. The fact that the Nameless King chose to make his home here shows just how completely he wanted to separate himself from the world that had cast him out. The first thing players encounter upon arriving is a trial by fire. A gigantic dragon called the Ancient Wyvern guards the entrance to the peak. This creature is massive, easily one of the largest beasts in the entire game. It circles the stone pathways and breathes fire at anyone foolish enough to approach. The Ancient Wyvern serves as a test. Archdragon Peak is a haven for dragons, and anyone who wants to enter must prove they can survive in a land ruled by these creatures. The Nameless King presumably commands or at least coexists with dragons like this one. They are his allies now, the beings he chose over his own divine family. Having a dragon guard the entrance makes perfect sense. Defeating the Ancient Wyvern requires cunning. Players must navigate a maze of pathways while the dragon hunts them from above. Eventually, the path leads to a platform directly over the creature's head, where a single plunging attack can end the fight. It is a fitting introduction to a place where dragons are revered. Beyond the Wyvern lies the peak itself, and the architecture tells its own story. Temples rise from the rocky landscape, their walls decorated with dragon imagery. Altars appear at regular intervals, surrounded by offerings left by worshippers who made the same journey you did. Statues depicting dragons in various poses stand throughout the area, some damaged by time, but others still intact and clearly maintained by devoted followers. Serpent men pilgrims kneel before these dragon symbols in prayer. These creatures have devoted themselves completely to dragon worship, twisting their bodies in imitation of the beings they revere. They attack anyone who threatens their sacred home, but watching them pray reveals a genuine devotion that goes beyond simple hostility. The entire peak feels like a monastery dedicated to dragons. Every structure, every symbol, every ritual performed here connects back to the same central idea. Dragons are worthy of worship. Dragons deserve reverence. The Nameless King found a place where his beliefs were not heresy but orthodoxy. At the far end of the peak stands the Great Belfry. This is a massive structure built around an enormous bell. The craftsmanship suggests it was constructed specifically for a purpose, though that purpose only becomes clear when you reach the top and ring the bell yourself. The sound echoes across the peak and into the storm clouds above. For a moment, nothing happens. Then the sky darkens further. Lightning crackles with new intensity, and from somewhere beyond normal sight, a figure descends. The Nameless King answers the call. The fact that a bell summons him suggests something interesting about how he spent his exile. Was he sleeping through the ages, waiting for someone worthy to wake him? Was he meditating in some space between worlds, only returning to physical form when challenged? Was he simply waiting at the peak, but choosing to appear only for those brave enough to ring the bell? The game never answers these questions directly, but the ritual of ringing the bell to summon him reinforces his status as something more than an ordinary boss. You are not stumbling upon him by accident. You are calling him forth. You are asking him to fight, and the Nameless King always answers that call. He emerges from the storm, riding his Stormdrake, the dragon companion he has fought alongside for centuries. The two of them descend upon the arena together, ready to face whoever was bold enough to summon them. This is the moment that players of Dark Souls had been waiting for since they first found those cryptic item descriptions about Gwyn's lost son. The mystery was finally about to reveal itself. The bell rings and the storm answers. Clouds that were already dark grow darker still. Wind that was already fierce becomes a howling gale. Lightning arcs across the sky with new fury, striking the ancient stones of the arena as if announcing something terrible. And then, from somewhere within that chaos, a shape emerges. The Nameless King descends on his Stormdrake. The dragon is massive, its wings spreading wide enough to blot out what little light remains. It screeches as it lands, a sound that mixes with the thunder until you cannot tell where one ends and the other begins. The health bar that appears at the bottom of the screen gives this creature a name, King of the Storm. This is not just a dragon. This is the embodiment of the Tempest itself. At first, the Nameless King is barely visible. He sits atop his companion's back, a figure in flowing robes with a crown upon his head. His weapon is a sword spear, the same type of blade he wielded during the war against the dragons ages ago. He looks small compared to the beast he rides, but appearances mean nothing here. This is one of the most dangerous encounters in the entire Dark Souls series, and it is about to prove why. The imagery of this entrance cements everything the lore has been building toward. The Nameless King commands both the elements and a dragon simultaneously. He is the storm personified, riding atop a creature of wind and lightning as naturally as Gwyn once rode into battle against the everlasting dragons. Except now the roles have reversed completely. The Dragon Slayer has become the Dragon Rider. The enemy of dragons has become their champion. When the fight begins, the Nameless King and his Stormdrake move as one. There is no hesitation between them, no miscommunication or delay. Every attack flows from a partnership that has been refined through centuries of battle. The dragon knows exactly what its rider wants. The rider knows exactly what his mount will do. They have fought together for so long that they have become a single weapon with two bodies. The Stormdrake breathes gouts of flame that sweep across the arena in wide arcs. It channels lightning through its mouth, spitting bolts of electricity that explode on contact. It takes to the air and swoops down with talons extended, forcing players to dodge or be torn apart. The dragon fights with the ferocity of a creature defending its home and its lord. But the most striking attacks come from the Nameless King himself. He plunges his Dragon Slayer sword spear directly into his own dragon, driving the blade into the creature's scales. This is not an act of violence against his companion. It is something far more remarkable. The Nameless King uses the Stormdrake as a conduit for his lightning, charging the weapon through the dragon's body before stabbing downward at the player below. The electricity flows from god to dragon to sword spear, creating an attack that combines their powers into something devastating. This technique demonstrates the depth of their bond better than any item description ever could. The Nameless King trusts his dragon completely. The dragon allows itself to be used as a channel for divine lightning. They have merged their abilities into attacks that neither could perform alone. This is what centuries of partnership look like in combat. The Nameless King can also summon bolts of lightning from the sky itself. He raises his sword spear and calls down the storm, sending crackling energy raining onto the arena. This skill echoes the techniques he used during the war against the dragons, when he hurled lightning at the everlasting dragons to peel away their stone scales. But now he uses that same power in defense of dragonkind, striking down any mortal who dares to challenge him in his domain. There is a poetic reversal happening in this fight that goes beyond simple gameplay. Once upon a time, Gwyn's firstborn was the greatest dragon slayer among the gods. He fought alongside his father to bring down the immortal dragons. He earned his reputation through lightning and spear, ending creatures that had existed since before time began. Now he rides a dragon into battle and uses that same lightning to protect everything he once tried to destroy. The champion of the gods has become the defender of dragons. The heir of sunlight has become the king of storms. The mortal unkindled who rings that bell and summons him is facing the ultimate test, a being who embodies both the strength of dragons and the fury of the gods combined into one opponent. The Stormdrake fights with everything it has. It swoops and breathes fire and channels lightning through its body for its rider. It takes hit after hit from whatever weapon the player wields, refusing to fall even as its health bar slowly drains. This creature has stood beside the Nameless King through ages of exile. It will not abandon him now, but eventually, even the mightiest dragon can be brought down. A determined player who learns the patterns and times their attacks correctly can deal enough damage to defeat the King of the Storm. The Stormdrake shudders and stumbles, its movements growing sluggish as the last of its strength fades. And then it collapses onto the stones of the arena, its massive body finally giving out after centuries of battle. What happens next is one of the most powerful moments in all of Dark Souls 3. The Nameless King dismounts slowly from his dying companion. There is no rush in his movements, no panic at the loss of his dragon. He walks toward the creature's head as it lies on the ground, its breath growing shallow, its eyes dimming. This is the end of a partnership that has lasted longer than most civilizations. The king pauses beside his fallen friend. In a gesture that speaks to everything their bond represented, he gently absorbs the essence of the Stormdrake into his sword spear. Whether this is the dragon's soul or simply its lingering storm power, the lore does not specify. But the meaning is clear. The Nameless King is taking his companion's strength into himself, carrying the Stormdrake's essence forward into the battle to come. The dragon's body dissipates into light and fades away. The storm continues to rage overhead, but something has changed. The arena feels emptier now. The partnership that defined the first phase of this fight is over. The Nameless King stands alone. He turns to face the player who brought down his oldest ally. His sword spear crackles with the absorbed power of the storm. His posture shifts from rider to warrior. The loss of his dragon has not weakened him. If anything, it has focused his fury into something far more dangerous. The second phase is about to begin, and the Nameless King has every intention of avenging his fallen friend. The health bar changes, and a new name appears at the bottom of the screen. It simply says, the Nameless King, no longer King of the Storm, no longer sharing the title with his dragon companion. Now it is just him, standing alone on the battlefield with the essence of his fallen friend crackling through his weapon. The storm rages harder than ever, as if the sky itself is mourning the Stormdrake's loss. And in the center of it all, the god of war prepares to fight. This is the moment where players discover why this boss has such a fearsome reputation. The music shifts as the second phase begins. Listen carefully, and you can hear something familiar woven into the composition. The theme carries motifs from Gwyn's own music in Dark Souls 1, the melancholy piano that played during the final battle against the Lord of Sunlight. Father and son are linked through their battle themes, connected across games by notes that echo between generations. The Nameless King is fighting to music that honors the father he still loved, even after everything that happened between them. He grips his Dragonslayer sword spear with both hands now. The weapon crackles with electricity, charged by the essence he absorbed from the Stormdrake. Every swing leaves trails of lightning in the air. Every thrust sends sparks flying across the arena. The full power of Gwyn's firstborn is about to be unleashed, and there is nowhere to hide from it. The Nameless King demonstrates mastery over lightning that exceeds anything his father ever showed. Gwyn wielded sunlight spears during his reign, but his son has taken that inheritance and pushed it beyond all limits. He hurls massive lightning bolts that fly across the arena and explode on contact, dealing devastating damage to anyone caught in the blast. These are not simple projectiles. They are storms compressed into weapon form. He can cause lightning to strike the ground beneath the player's feet, but the attack does not end there. The electricity lingers in the stone, crackling and building before erupting in delayed bursts. Players who think they have dodged the initial strike find themselves caught by the follow-up explosion. Timing becomes everything in this fight. You cannot simply react to what you see. You have to anticipate what comes next. At times, the Nameless King charges his sword spear with fierce wind and lightning together. The weapon glows with combined elemental fury. Then he swings it in wide arcs that send blade-like shockwaves of storm flying toward his opponent. These attacks have range that seems impossible for a melee weapon. The air itself becomes a cutting edge in his hands. Every single move he makes reinforces the same truth. This is the heir to Lord Gwyn's lightning. This is what happens when divine power over storms is wielded by someone who has spent countless ages refining his technique. He is a living tempest given human form, and he fights like the force of nature he has become. The marshal's skill on display explains why he earned the title God of War. His timing is impeccable throughout the entire fight. Attacks that seem like they should miss connect at the last possible moment. Swings that look slow suddenly accelerate into devastating strikes. He reads the player's movements and punishes hesitation or greed. Every opening he offers is a trap. Every moment of vulnerability is bait. The range of his sword spear gives him an advantage that most bosses cannot match. He can strike from distances that keep him safe from shorter weapons. Players who try to create space find him closing the gap with lunges that carry him across the arena on gusts of wind. He does not walk toward his opponents. He rides the storm itself, covering ground faster than any being that size should be able to move. His strength is immense beyond what any mortal could match. Hits that connect send players staggering backward or knock them flat onto the stones. The shockwaves from his heaviest attacks can break through guards and drain stamina even on perfect blocks. Trading blows with him is suicide. He hits harder, recovers faster, and has more health than almost any other enemy in the game. He uses combos that chain thrusts into slashes, into overhead smashes without pause. Just when you think you understand his pattern, he throws in a new variation. Just when you find an opening to attack, he follows up with a move you have never seen before. The unpredictable mix of melee strikes and lightning attacks keeps players off balance throughout the entire fight. This is why the Nameless King is considered one of the toughest bosses in the entire Dark Souls series. Players who have conquered every other challenge the game offers still struggle against him. The combination of high health, heavy damage, and attacks that punish both aggression and passivity creates a fight that demands true mastery. You cannot brute force your way through this encounter. You cannot overlevel and ignore the mechanics. You have to learn the Nameless King, understand his patterns, and execute perfectly under pressure. It is fitting that a being of his legendary stature provides such a legendary challenge. The God of War earns his title through gameplay as much as through lore. But even gods can fall. A determined player who studies the patterns and stays patient can eventually bring the Nameless King down. Hit by hit, his massive health bar drains. His attacks grow no weaker, his patterns remain just as dangerous, but the end approaches all the same. And when the final blow lands, something remarkable happens. The Nameless King drops to one knee. For a moment he stays there, this ancient god who has lived since the dawn of the Age of Fire. He fought alongside his father against the everlasting dragons. He founded a covenant that survived across countless ages. He sacrificed everything for the dragons he came to love. And now, after all of it, he has finally been defeated. Then he explodes in a burst of light. The radiance fills the arena, blinding and brilliant. His body dissipates into the air, scattering on the wind that still howls around the battlefield. The storm begins to calm. The clouds part just slightly. The God of War is gone. What remains is his soul, waiting to tell its story. The soul of the Nameless King sits in the player's inventory, waiting to be examined. And when you read its description, the mystery that has persisted since Dark Souls 1 finally receives its answer. The text is direct and unambiguous. The Nameless King was once a dragon-slaying god of war who sacrificed everything to ally with the ancient dragons. There it is in plain words. No more speculation required. No more theories or guesses or maybes. He was Gwyn's firstborn son. He was the god of war who helped defeat the dragons at the dawn of the Age of Fire. He was the founder of the Warriors of Sunlight, the patron whose name was erased from history, the exile who vanished into myth. And now players had textual proof connecting every piece of his story together. After years of searching through item descriptions and debating on forums, the Dark Souls community finally had their answer. The Nameless King was the lost son of Lord Gwyn, and defeating him meant ending the story that began with a broken statue and a cryptic ring description back in the first game. The mystery was solved. The legend was complete.